Hi, everyone. I am Stephen Pedigo, the director of the LBJ Urban Lab and faculty at the school. Thanks for joining us for this conversation for In the Arena. I'm pleased to be joined today by Peter Mullan, CEO of the Waterloo Greenway Conservancy here in Austin, Texas. Peter and I are going to join into a really short conversation about this idea of how is COVID-19 really impacting the question of public space in our communities and how we're gathering and how we're developing community. So with that, Peter, welcome and thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So Peter, much of your career has been focused on leading organizations that curate, maintain, and promote public space, and promote gathering spaces for how we as communities come together. What's your view on how this pandemic has potentially changed the way that we'll create community and come together in our cities?
So, certainly it's unprecedented. And so I think the first challenge is that it's been totally disorienting, in terms of how to manage it and how to react. But I think that, and certainly in the short term, it's completely disrupted how we gather and get together and commune. And certainly in physical space, it's just that's been eliminated to a large degree. But I think that the flip side of this is that, like a lot of crises, and if 9/11 is an interesting analog, so forgive me if I refer back to that, because, I think the other thing is we all fall back on our own experience in these
Sure.
moments, right? And that's the closest thing that I have, because I was in New York during that period. But it's made us, I think, in many ways more intentional about how we relate to one another, right? Both just in terms of making a connection. I had a neighbor tell me, who I met on a walk, right? And from a safe distance said, that this experience has made her much more intentional about her communications and her connections with people. I think, and a lot of us have probably had the experience where we've gotten in touch with like high school friends or friends that we haven't talked to in a long time, or I'm certainly talking to family members a lot more than I ever did before the crisis, right? So ironically, it's actually intensified our connection, I think, and it's tapped into a kind of inner desire to connect.
Yeah, I think you're right about this idea of like neighborhood walks, right? Brian and I took Oswald, my Boston Terrier, for those that are joining us, for a walk on Sunday, and he and I both remarked about how more friendly and engaging and outwardly people have been recently with this pandemic.
Well, absolutely, right? The question will be is, can we make that feeling last, right?
Yeah.
Particularly in the recovery, the other thing I think is really interesting about this moment is that it's made us much more aware of the notion of space, right? If you think about, we never really thought about what 6 feet separation meant. And frankly, I think every time you go out and you walk around the neighborhood to take a walk and you're measuring those distances, you're much more aware of the notion of negative space.
Yeah.
In the physical world and essentially, I think, public space in general, right? So to me, this moment has aroused and awakened everybody's inner urban planner, right? An urban designer, right? Because now all of a sudden we're looking around and we're paying attention to these spatial dynamics and these spatial relationships in ways that we never were before. And so part of my question is how do we leverage that, for a much broader sort of awareness and investment in public space.
So what do you think, that's a perfect lead into the next question is, so as you think about these issues and this idea that we've tapped into this urban designer, and I love that analogy, by the way, I think it's a great way to think about it. How do you think that organizations like yours who manage and really curate these spaces, what does that mean for the future of public space?
Yeah, again, there's different time scales to this. In the short term, we're just trying to figure out how to connect our community. The community that people have followed us and have participated in our events and are programs historically. You know, how do we keep that community connected and connect them to resources where possible? And you know, we're still figuring that out. I mean, we're trying to adapt to that. But part of what we're also talking about a lot is how do we prepare for the recovery? Because I think the work that we do is going to be only more important to the process of healing, you know, once we are actually able to get outside and get back together. People are going to want to gather in public spaces. They're going to want to go to parks. I mean, it's going to be, there's going to be a celebration of that moment. And, you know, how are we going to make sure that we're there to provide the opportunity for those kinds of celebrations and gatherings?
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about this idea of the celebration of wanting to come back together. You know, anecdotally, as personally, I keep saying, well, I can't wait till I can do X again, which is about public space, right? But this moment of like celebration is an interesting one for sure, to sort of think about how you essentially help people, and almost in a sense about communicating what public space means to them, but also that sort of sense of like the importance of it, how important that public space really is to us, right?
Yeah, I think everybody's realizing that, I mean, especially places where you can commute with nature. I mean, there's obviously a chemical benefit that you get from those kinds of experiences of being in nature, and we need those moments now a lot. And so I think people are trying to get those moments when they can. You know, I actually do. I mean, this is unfortunately, I'm the perennial optimist. I think we're going to get out of this. And I think we're going to be, I hope we're just going to be more aware of how much more related we are than we thought we were before all this. I mean, I saw this great quote. I got to read it. You know, this isn't the end of the world. It's the most remarkable act of global solidarity we may ever witness.
Yeah, that's a great quote.
And, you know, we got to just hold on to that and then figure out how to express it and enact it in our public spaces.
You know, it's funny that you say that, because, you know, Rich Florida and I wrote this piece for Brookings, which I think I shared with you. And we were looking at what do we think that cities will do. And we were both debating about this idea of what is the future of public space. It's a question I posed to you. It's a question that I've been thinking a lot about. And I actually think that this moment, while right now we're socially distanced, we can't gather together, we're having to figure out new ways to connect each other. I actually think that this moment, or this pause, is actually really good for potentially good for organizations like you, just to show the value of how much we sometimes take for granted all the great common public spaces we have in our cities.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think that I mean, it's the same way about the communications, right? We have this heightened sensitivity to a lot of things that we took for granted before. And I think the real challenge for us as a community is to figure out, you know, do we just slip back into that slightly complacent, you know, approach, or do we leverage that heightened awareness?
Yeah.
And to create some real structural changes or some significant investments in these things that we recognize that are so important to us as a community.
Yeah.
You know, certainly our healthcare system, right, and making sure that we're adequately prepared in the future to handle something like this. You know, our communication systems and our public spaces.
So I just want to get a little bit more tactile, perhaps,
just
to get some thoughts. And that is, so let's say we get to this June 1 or July 1, right? And I say that, and I sometimes get shivers that I think that it could be a lot longer, but it most likely will be, and we know that. We get ready to open public space again up, public spaces like yours across the city, parks, that sort of civic infrastructure, right? You know, bars, restaurants, those types of things, convention centers, those types of, you know, do you think that there are specifics in which we'll have to do in terms of retrofitting some of these spaces to be able to allow us to ease back into that? Or do you think is that even going to be needed? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a hard time imagining. I mean, look, the analog with 9/11 were new security protocols at the airport.
Yeah.
Right. That now have become physically integrated into the designs of airports and fundamentally altered that whole spatial experience. I don't personally, I have a hard time imagining how we permanently embed social distancing into the design of public space.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think I have a hard time imagining how we would do that, or that we would want to do that. That is sort of a dystopian future in my mind.
Yeah.
I think that there's going to be more of an impetus on preparedness, right? In terms of our kind of, our institutional structures, whether, that, so that if and when, we have a similar kind of event, we're more prepared to respond to it. I think, again, at the beginning of this, the scale of the response, it was hard to gauge what was appropriate, right? And that was part of what was so confusing about it. When we closed South by, it's really, closing South by, canceling South by, to me, really brought this home. And then obviously everybody questioned whether that was necessary. In retrospect, that was obviously the right choice, right? I think next time this happens, we're going to be better prepared to make those decisions in a quicker and more effective way that actually limits the impact.
So that's an interesting perspective, right? I mean, because some folks have said, well, maybe we need to put health checks or wellness checks or space out restaurants. And what you're saying is maybe it's not that, but it is this idea of being prepared of being prepared to be able to react to how, that public safety issues or public wellness issues sort of come up. I mean, what made this so challenging is that on the grand scale of things, we had not really, as a community, as a larger community, really faced this sort of issue of a large-scale public health crisis, right, of this sort. And so maybe going forward, this question about what is public space, maybe it's more valued, maybe it's more connected, maybe it's more personally curated, maybe, right, your interaction. But it's, for all of that to happen, the holy crap moment, or the holy moment for us, is that those social safety networks kind of have to be in place to make this work.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think there's certain habits that are going to change, right?
Yeah.
We're going to wash our hands more, as a community. I expect, because that we're going to build that in, and that's an easy one, right? But I don't see us like, are we going to do this to everybody? I don't think so, because the desire is exactly the opposite of that. The desire is to try to bring people closer. The thing that I think could change, I mean, one of the big movements in public space design, curation, management, obviously has been the focus on equity. Mm-hmm. And I think that this moment only reinforces that and will expand it, right? This idea of that, we are one common humanity, right? We're much more connected than we thought we were before. Mm-hmm. And more broadly, in a more diverse way.
Yeah.
I think people are going to feel that more directly than they did before, right? People are going to feel more connected to people who are not like them more than they did before this happened. And so the role of public space is to build that kind of shared experience, shared identity, among people that maybe normally are not that connected. I think that, to me, is going to become more important and a bigger part of public spaces going forward.
Yeah. Well, let's end it there. That's a great message to end on. Peter, thanks for joining us. I much appreciate this conversation, and I know the folks tuning into the video do as well. Thanks so much, my friend.
It was really a pleasure. And let's do it again.
Yeah.
Let's keep it going. Thanks.
Cheers.